I'm Cynthia Gasecki, Director of Scholarships and Philanthropy for the Council for Military Spouses Club. And today, this is a two-part series for scholarships. And today's series, we will cover your standard of operating procedures, your timeline, and the judging committee. And so this afternoon, or wherever you're chiming in from, this afternoon here with us, I'm gonna really quickly just go over some of our scholarship program, some of the important stuff that you need to just kind of keep in mind when we're dealing with these three topics this afternoon. But I did want to take a moment here real quickly and say thank you to all of you for attending. And also thank you to Susanna, who I am going to be chatting with a little bit here in our series. She's going to offer some tips and recommendations of her experience as a scholarship chairperson. And then we also have other council board members with us. So I don't want to forget them as well. So we'll go ahead and get started here and briefly just talk about these really important topics as you are coming on board as a scholarship chairperson. This series here really is going to be most effective to an individual who's probably jumping in for the first time or is transitioning from a different club and is becoming familiar with the governing documents for that specific club. I do want to emphasize the importance for scholarship chairpersons to become familiar with your governance documents, so that those governance documents is your constitution and your bylaws for your club. Those will be the two documents that you really need to rely on in order to have the most effective standard of operating procedures, the most effective timeline, and also your governance for your judging committee. So I do want to emphasize the importance of relying on those documents. And then lastly, also rely on the after action report. So if you're just coming on board, you want to take a look at that after action report from the previous scholarship chairperson. And if this is your second or third or, infinite time being the same scholarship person, that, you do want to go back and look at those lessons learned, and so that you can bring in those concerns, those challenges that you went through during the process to improve upon the New Year's scholarship program process. Does anyone have anything that they want to add on to what I've just mentioned? All right, so I'm gonna, before I talk through anything, when after the webinar series, you will have access to supplemental material. So we are going to have some templates up for you to have access to those. If you're a member, you'll get the link to those supplemental materials. So do stay tuned because you can have access to everything that I'm going to go through with you, some templates that you can take to use. Make sure that you have a set foundation and some ideas of how to move forward with the scholarship program. So right now, you're entering your scholarship year. You are obviously having super signups, membership fairs, whatnot. And this is a great opportunity for you to start networking, meeting the people in your local community, trying to figure out whether your community looks the same from last year, and really trying to put all of that together so that you can have a diverse judging committee. You want to make sure that your judging committee is an example of the community that you're serving. So again, go back to that constitution and bylaws, see how many people need to be on that judging committee. And then if it's specific enough that your club has decided whether you have to have a particular number of enlisted members on there, officers, a ratio between maybe local community members, etc. I was on a council where, I'm sorry, I was in a committee where it wasn't very specific. So I had a lot of leeway as a scholarship chairperson, and I chose some judges from a community college and a nearby university. And those folks were on my judging committee. Some constitution and bylaws are very specific, where, they ask you to have active duty service members on your committee. So, you would definitely have to go to your local installations and find those folks. Some will give you a ratio of member and non-member. So do pay attention to those when you're looking at your judging committee. But what I wanted to really emphasize on the judging committee, and I started with judging committee because it's really like the smallest portion of today's webinar, but it's your high impact, high probability of your scholarship program. And what I mean is that your judging committee is going to have the highest impact because they are going to be the ones who determine who is going to receive the scholarship funds. So you need to pay careful attention, right, to who you're bringing in to that committee. And then also the highest probability for you as a scholarship chairperson, because you're the owner of the integrity and the credibility of the scholarship program. So you have to ensure that you are managing risks with your judging committee. And so I'm going to touch on those 2 points right now. I'm going to share my screen with you here. All right, and hopefully everyone can see my screen. In front of you, this is a Word document, and I'll share this with you all after the webinar series. But it's a really quick, very easy document that you can make up yourself to just touch on some very clear points and ensure that, as I mentioned earlier, that you're managing the risks from the very beginning. I'm not quite sure how your scholarship programs are being run, but it's very important for you to, one, have an orientation with your judging committee members. First off, if you are gathering people who are not familiar with your club, that you're giving them an orientation of your mission, your vision, your mission statement, what the purpose of your scholarship is, who are the scholarship applicants that you're trying to give the funds to. So you want to touch on those points during an orientation. But when I talk about high probability for risk management, meaning that you want your club to be transparent on how these funds are being given, you definitely want to set some norms, some rules on how you're going to move forward and your expectations of that judging committee. So this form here in front of you will take care of that. One, what scoring sheets and rubrics are going to be provided to them, a confidentiality statement that you want them to sign. In front of you, you can see it's as simple as scores will be compiled and held in confidence until public release. You might want to get into detail by saying, by telling your judges, this is when we will be releasing them. And then after that, your judges know that, they've been released. And now they can tell, Susie that, Tim was given a scholarship. And then it also states there that judges will not confer with other judges on determining a score. So this is judges will be doing the scoring on their own, without any input from anybody else. And then the conduct that you want from your judges, that judges will not discuss the application contents or, confer with any other judges, that there will be no outside discussions with anyone else. I was on a club where we had the scholarship chairperson who was the one conferring and talking about the process with other members. So, you also maybe as a scholarship chairperson want to sign something to remind yourself that you too, have to hold and be accountable to that responsibility as well and lead from the front. So you want to make sure that this is handled appropriately to manage those risks. Does anyone here that I have on live want to add anything on about the judging committee?
I think also keeping obviously the confidentiality, but also keeping track of all of the applications, ensuring that names are blacked out and no one has access to those except for a non-judging member who is receiving the applications and numbering them or however they do.
Yes, thank you, Tim. You bring a really excellent point that I'm going to touch on in your SOP and your timeline. But yes, definitely, part of that risk management is to do everything prior to giving anything over to the judging committee, that you ensure that you are redacting any information that can implicate, the process. So, I can't emphasize enough that if you are not going through what if scenarios and trying to minimize the risk, it's going to make your job more difficult, more challenging. I recall the multiple times that I had a parent, email me saying, hey, why didn't my son or daughter not receive the scholarship? And all parents, right? We want to, we know that our kids are, the best and they're going to get that scholarship, and, the judging committee can have a different idea. And so, you want to be sure that if you're managing those risks, then you can very, very state very well to that parent, with, hey, this is the process, this was the scoring, and these were the type of judges, and that's the other thing too, that you want to redact, the names of the judges, but you do want to say, I had two university professors in English. I had, one active duty member, in JAG. I had, whatever. If you want to go down with credentials of your judging panel. But certainly, you want to redact as much of that confidential information, but you want to be also, transparent and let people know the process. We held it with integrity and we minimized the risks, and these were the results. And I think that it leaves people in a comfortable position and they trust, that the process was fulfilled and successful in the end.
Hey,
and that
Cynthia,
yes,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
I was just going to say, do you have a recommendation of how many judges you should have? Does it flex based on the number of applications, or is there like, should it be 3? Should it be 8? Should it be 12? I'm not really sure how one decides how many you would have.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that the safe would be to have an odd number, right? So that it makes the voting easier. You kind of have that odd number and, sort of that 50 plus 1. And then flex it as the amounts of application, because you certainly don't want to have a large panel and a small, application, number of applications that come through. I recall when I was at a club, they were used to getting a small number of applications, and we had 3 judges. And so I had recruited 3 judges. We had one of those unknown unknowns, that a club that was very close in proximity decided to not go forward with their scholarship program at that time. And we ended up with an influx of applications that typically were handled by the other club. So we quickly had to, again, go back to our governance documents, see if we could, take all those other applicants from a local proximity. And if it was very close, we decided to designate our radius or our area within 50 miles radius. So we were able to take in that influx, but it then created more work for the committee. And so I ended up having to go from 3 judges to 5. And when I mean influx, it was from, say, 20 applications to we ended up with close to 100 applications. And, very small club, but they were just not used to that number. So, like you, Carolyn, I think flexing is good because you do have those unknown unknowns. You just don't know what will happen. So, if you have 3 because you're a very small club and very small applicant pool, and, something goes weary where, this was one of those things that just, you never foresee happening, but we were able to flex and go to 5 real quickly.
And in clubs that I've been a part of where that's happened, we also would tend to break apart the different categories of applicants. So we would have a set of judges. If we could acquire the judges, that is, we would separate the high school applicants from the college applicants or the spouse applicants or whatever categories where we've also had that happen where we suddenly had hundreds of applications or many dozens of applications. And that made it easier so that we had the same judges for a particular category that we were giving away. And so that we knew at the end of it that all of the applicants for a particular category were judged by the same people using the same process. And we didn't have different people who might have different scoring opinions.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great other technique, Tim, that I have seen that, you can break your judging committee into the various categories. Some clubs might not have multiple categories. I've seen where they just strictly stick to high school seniors. Now they're adding trade schools. You have continuing education for your adult, your military spouses, and then you also have your college students. So, that's another great technique that, you could break it down to a category and split, the numbers there. So yeah, great advice.
Hey, Cynthia, Susanna might have had a comment. Did you raise your hand,
Go ahead,
Susanna?
I think I was going to comment on judges. So that at the end of my little presentation, things I would change for next time. So we had 21 applicants and I had 7 judges because I wanted an odd number. It was just a lot of work to make 7 binders. So I think for us 5 would have been a good number because it's that odd number. And anyway, that's what I was going to say. It was just kind of like what we chose. But like Tim mentioned, he had dozens of applications. We had 22 and then someone was 1 day late and I was heartbroken, but I just had to say, sorry, you were late. So then we went to 21. But I think an odd number is the best. And then don't make yourself do too much work. So 5.
Right.
5 good.
Yeah, no, great tips, Susanna. Yeah, I mean, like I said, be flexible, where you end up maybe hitting a challenge of that unknown. Another club might decide, hey, we just didn't make enough funds, and you can, take an influx of applicants from their area. I've seen that happen a few times, even during the pandemic. I was in a club that we just could not give our scholarship money because we relied so heavily on our thrift shop. And our thrift shop ended up being closed by the garrison because of COVID. And so we had to tell our applicants, hey, these are other clubs that are giving funds, and they've opened it up for everyone within our location. And so, you just have to be able to flex. We're really good at that anyways, but make sure that you're putting this into your governance documents, that it gives you that ability to flex, and it's not so rigid that, in Susanna's case, seven judging committee members and you're getting 20 applications, right? Flex and then minimize that number and move forward. But yeah, definitely great tips from everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the SOP, because from the SOP, I'm going to tie it into that timeline. But as I mentioned with the SOP, I'm not going to deep dive into some of the critical items that you can easily grab from your governance documents. For example, eligibility. Eligibility should already be in your governance documents. As a club, you should be, talking about this. Hey, who's going to be eligible for a scholarship? Ensure that you are using references, what you're supposed to be doing legally by the IRS laws. If there are any other policies in place, that all of that is being taken into consideration, and that you're referencing that into your standard of operating procedures, because everybody's club looks different and everybody's governing board makes different decisions, right? And so, but you want to make sure that everything within that SOP is reviewed by, you can have a review by JAG. You can, even if you're a member with us, send it over to us and we can review it with you and make sure that, again, you're minimizing risks, right? You don't want to end up having to later have to have your integrity, your credibility, and your trust questioned by anyone in your local community, right? We're all here to make a difference in our community and do good in our community. And you just want to make sure, that you're getting everything on checked off, right? So what I want to touch, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll add a comment. So my husband is a JAG, so it was really nice that he was able to review it. And then our spouses club president was the head JAG, so my husband's boss. And so that was nice for them to review it. So I followed everything, like all the procedures. Everything was anonymous. And I still had people complain and said, like, this wasn't fair, that wasn't fair. But I knew at the end of the day, I did everything I was supposed to do, and I felt zero guilt about anything because it was followed procedure by, the head JAG on base. And I feel unfortunate that people feel sad about it because, yeah, you want to advocate for your children. But because we dotted every I, crossed every T, I can sleep at night the same night. So just emphasis on that.
Yes, no, kudos to you, Susanna, for doing the right thing, right? Having a check through legal, that you're following any critical IRS laws, right? Because we're all under the IRS as a 501c3, 4, 5, whatever it is that you are. And then also policies that are in place if you are designated as a private organization on an installation. You want to make sure that you're following also, those rules, regulations, policy in place for you able to be, for you to be able to play in that community, right? So you just want to make sure, again, like Susanna said, cross those T's, dot those I's, and make sure that at the end of the day, again, that if your credibility and your integrity and your trust is being questioned, that you can come back and reference all the governing documents, all the policies, regulations, and laws that are in place, and and that, yeah, I mean, you're always going to have somebody say, it's not fair. My child should have received this scholarship. I should have received this scholarship. I've been a military spouse for X number of years, and I'm the, the top volunteer. But at the end of the day, your judging committee is going to come up with those, with who's going to receive them. So thank you, Susanna, for that tip. And yes, I recommend you have it checked. If your local JAG, just doesn't want to work with you or doesn't want to check it for you, again, be a member of this organization, and we'll gladly, work with you to get you those resources and those looks on your governance documents. But let me share, go ahead, Tim, while I'm sharing my screen.
I think that another thing that really helps is being transparent about the scoring process, your rubric, so that upfront applicants know how they'll be scored, parents know how their students will be scored, and you can always refer back to an objective rubric. Of course, the judging part can be subjective as far as essays and different things like that. But if you have a solid rubric and as objective measures as you can create, then that makes it easier to point back to, this is the criteria we scored, and out of the applicants we only had this number of spots and this number of applicants. And so out of that, unfortunately, your student was just, or your application fell just below our cutoff, or didn't fall in the top X number of scholarships that we had available to give away. We'd love to give one to everyone. However, we have a finite amount of funds, and this was the scoring. And we apologize, or we regret that we weren't able to do it this year, but we encourage you to apply next year.
Right. Thank you, Tim. And people watching this, you can take Tim's words for verbatim and write that really neat statement. Yes. I mean, the regret letters that go out, right? At the end of the day, if you have everything squared away, that regret message will make it will be so much easier, because you'll have everything behind you that you can just take from your governance documents, you can take from your judging committee's motion and approval of your board, to the person doing the questioning, and be very transparent in showing that. And also, one thing that Tim touched is that you want to be as transparent in your governance documents. And so, I mean, great transition into your standard of operating procedures. What you have in front of you is Article 5. So all the articles before that, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to deep dive into those, and you'll have a complete template available to you after the webinar. But what I did want to say is that everything before procedure is going to be like the purpose of your scholarship. So that's, what kinds of scholarships are you giving? When are you going to convene? How are you going, who's going to vote? Who's going to have the final vote, right? Your judging committee makes the judging decision, but how is that going to be approved? Does that need to go to another scholarship committee? Then from there, it goes to your executive board final decision, or does the whole board vote, right? So how does your program look? Which is why I don't want to deep dive, because all programs look differently. I've been in a club where you had a scholarship committee that was separate from a judging committee. The scholarship committee did things like updated and revised the standard of operating procedures, came up with the procedures, worked with the board on, the governance of the scholarship. And then the judging committee were just your reviewers, right? They didn't have the ultimate say. Your scholarship committee also did the disbursements. I've been in another club where the judging committee reviewed and dispersed. So you kind of want to see in the purpose how is that program going to look for your club, right? How is it going to meet your community's needs? And then Article 2 would be eligibility. And in eligibility, I'll go a little bit on it in webinar 2 when we talk about application. But just like Tim touched earlier, who can apply, right? What is that applicant going to look like? And then also that's the one probably section that you definitely want to get legal review, right? Can you designate an area? Is it 50 miles? Is it 25 miles? How do you want to set, that program sort of apart, but also be inclusive, right? Because you can't take everybody, right? You have limited funds. So how are you going to apply that eligibility to your program? The majority part of your standard of operating procedures are your procedures, right? And sort of think about it like your timeline. This is why I said I'm going to sort of transition these two together. Your procedures are all the steps that you are going to take the program from, whatever that starting date to the finish, okay? You can also use this procedure section to make your timeline. So sort of giving you that check off the block so that it's easier for you to know, hey, what do I need to be doing, when? So make it as detailed as possible. Just don't get in the weeds, right? Just sort of make it concise and succinct. And use it sort of like your communication and marketing plan within your procedures. So everything should be there, kind of going down. What am I supposed to be doing as a scholarship chairperson? One way to think about it is, as you're doing the work, you can journal it, you can take some notes so that okay, how am I going about in the process? And then push it into your SOP if you don't have one. I strongly suggest that if you don't have one, begin here right now, okay? So in front of you, go ahead, Tim.
Cynthia, someone has raised their hand with a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Chime in.
Hey, Cynthia, yes. So it's Lisa. One of the things I was going to mention too was use your advisors as well, because sometimes you do have executive board members who have children who are applying for scholarships, especially your president, your vice president, things like that. They might have children, so try to use those advisors in those places as well when looking at talking to your JAG office and things. And then the other thing was, just because you have 20 applicants or 50 applicants and you might only have 10 grand to give out, not all of those applicants necessarily are going to receive money, because it goes back to your judging and determining what is the smallest amount you're going to give, what's the largest amount you're going to give. It is, I don't want to say survival of the fittest, but at the same time, you want to ensure that it is a fair practice and that the people who did the best receive the best as well.
No, right, Lisa. Yeah, I mean, use your advisors, especially when, as a chairperson, you're going through that standard of operating procedures. Have a small little committee, to go over it. Make sure you're hitting all the points. And then have it reviewed, through legal or, through some of the resources that are made available to you. But definitely, yes, Lisa. I mean, again, it's not going at the end. Some people are going to feel that they should have received the funds. But as long as you're maintaining the integrity of all your governance documents, your program will have a really concise and wonderful regret to those folks, that they'll feel they were honest with me. They're, a trusting organization, and I feel comfortable, that my child did not receive, the scholarship. So yeah, great points, Lisa.
And not because they were they weren't good enough, but just when you have a pool of applicants, you're judging those applicants against each other for those limited funds or limited spots. So they might have received one in another pool of candidates. If you have if you have 100 really, really, really strong candidates, unfortunately, someone is still not going to win the scholarship.
Mhm.
Right.
With-
No, great points.
With that, we had a board member who the child was applying for a scholarship, and she was just like set that her daughter was going to win. I had no control over it. I'm not a judge. Anyway,
Right.
so her daughter got like 5th place or whatnot, and like we talked about before, integrity, everything was. I could show her all the scorecards, like I didn't score anything. Anyway, so she was a little bit bummed that her daughter didn't win 1st place, but at her high school, she ended up winning all these awards and got other scholarship money. So maybe from our judge's viewpoint, she didn't fit this specific scholarship, but she fit it somewhere else. So we're not here to please everybody, but do our part for this specific community, and they'll be rewarded other places as well.
Right. No, absolutely. And one you bring a great point, Susanna. One thing that I didn't that I forgot to mention is that when you're going through your judging committee, make sure, and again, I'm going to say this again, make sure that the people that you've selected to be on your judging committee, their children or themselves are not applying for the scholarship. One, because there's, obviously that conflict of interest, that there is no conflict of interest. Two, that you don't want to have board members, all your judging committee be board members, right? So you want to have a diverse set of committee members, and you want to make sure that there's not that conflict of interest, that you can also put on that judging committee document. And then again, if a board member's child does apply, that you also consider putting that somewhere on your standard of operating procedures on how you're going to handle that. Because, in Susanna's case, the board member's child did not get the scholarship, but if it had been the opposite, you want to make sure, again, minimizing your risks, being transparent, right? That you have something in place on how you're going to handle that.
Yeah.
Whether
So
it's
even when we had like our full spouses club meetings, whenever we got to the scholarship topic, she would leave. So we always did that like at the end of the meeting so that there would no controversy or she didn't overhear something or whatnot.
Yeah, no, that's great point, Susanna. Yep. Always make sure conflicts of interest step outside of the room and that you're managing that as well. So as a scholarship chairperson, again, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this webinar, you are one of the owners of the credibility and the integrity of the organization. And when you're not minimizing risks, you're going to have issues, right? And so you want to make sure that you have a risk plan somewhere. If for some reason you're having a board meeting, and you forget to mention, or the president or the parliamentarian forgets to mention, if there's a conflict of interest here at this time, who needs to step outside, please do so at this moment, because we're going to be discussing, XYZ of the scholarship program. And your son or daughter, is applying for this. That you have something in place, to minimize it and be able to, correct that mistake. So your SOP, your standard of operating procedures, is where you want to make sure that you're putting all of this in writing so that you can reference it, you can go back to it, you can set it as a reminder. I take the SOP and I do a printout for myself, and I I highlight everything, I check things, check mark things so that I make sure that, hey, I am touching all these points. I'm, again, I can't stress enough that ultimately there's always going to be some question, and you want to make sure that, you're covering, and this is not necessarily covering yourself, but it is covering, an entire organization, right? Again, you lose trust, you're not gonna, it's hard to gain back. So again, in your procedures, that's where you want to put all of this stuff. You want to minimize all those risks. If you take a look at the screen, I put things in bold that I want to emphasize. You have here, black out all references to the applicant's name. That in bold, it reminds me and it keeps it there, ingrained in my brain that when I start receiving applications, that I'm starting to redact all that information. I was
on
ahead,
that.
Susanna.
Sorry to interrupt. So I was able to look at the scholarship chairs book like the year before. They did black them out, but they left like the personal email on there. So
Yes.
my email is my last name and my
Right.
first initial. So that was blatant. So I made sure on all the paperwork that was actually put in the judge's binders that had no places where my name here. So when I actually made or created the packet, the application packet, that the first 2 or 3 pages, which was like here, all this stuff we're talking about, the information, the promise of integrity, here are the rules, all those things, those where they sign, none of that was included in the judge's folders. So page 1 through 3, I kept in the confidential binder. Then page 4 through 7, the judges were actually able to see, which would have the ACT scores and whatnot also, which were completely whited out, because I was looking through the binder. I'm like, this is not anonymous at all, because you can see the person's last name. And our base specifically in Wyoming was very small. Everybody knew everybody.
Yeah.
And it was half anonymous.
Yeah, no, great point, Susanna. And I was about to say that I was fortunate enough that I had my husband helping me once I was redacting, helping me to go back and make sure, that I redacted. Because again, yes, you bring a great point. Emails, an email can be there after you see so many applications, you can easily miss the name. I recall one time that a student wrote an essay. First page was fine. Second page, their last name was right on the right-hand corner was their last name. And I remember not even going to the essay because on the application policy, rules and checklists, it said, in there, do not write your name anywhere on the essay. So, again, don't assume. Check every single page. Even if you put on there page 4 through 7, there should be no name. Check them, double check them, have a separate little intimate committee that you can get them to, again, be confidential, that you can trust to help you redact if it's, if you have an influx of applications or a large application pool, that, you have sort of people on the table, you're redacting, they're just checking, making sure that no name is, being populated in any of the other pages. Because when you sit there and you're doing all these applications, I'm telling you from experience that an email, a phone number, a student will not follow the instructions and a name will be there, or a recommender. They write a recommendation letter, and I had one, it specifically said on the form, do not mention the student's name. I'm not kidding you, the name was the very last line where it said, I highly recommend such and such. And it was the very last line of the recommendation letter. So if I had not sat there and read the entire recommendation letter, I would have not caught the name. it's as simple as that, and it's just, you're in the weeds during that process, but I cannot stress enough to have multiple eyes looking at those packets, because yeah, a name is bound to pop up. So yeah, great point, Susanna, on the emails too. And you can put that blank out all references to the applicant's name, email, you can get as detailed as you want.
I would also recommend blacking out any pronouns, he, she, they kind of thing.
Yes.
So there's absolutely no reference to a gender.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's something that some clubs I've been a part of have removed all personally identifiable information and even
Pronouns.
changed information on, and they would make it obvious in the recommendation letters or essay. Now, up to the point that the essays might talk about volunteering for certain organizations that imply a race, religion, sex, or whatever, but as much as possible would just remove anything that identifies even who the person might possibly be, sex, religion, race, anything else.
Yeah, no, great points, Tim. Yeah, definitely. And again, this is in your procedures of your, standard operating procedures, you want to make sure that you want to be, as detailed in the procedure, what you want redacted, how you want to handle the confidentiality of your applicants and how you want to protect, the identity of your applicants. You want to make sure that, you're putting all that, because you need to make sure that you're letting that scholarship chairperson know, hey, this is exactly what you need to do. And how, and then the board, can handle the accountability, how they're going to handle, if the process, if something goes wrong in the process. But as a scholarship chairperson, you want to make sure that you have somewhere that tells you exactly how, you should handle your responsibilities as the chairperson. So definitely,
Cynthia, something
ahead.
else. Talking about the redacting, I made me think of it, and that I don't think it's been mentioned is with redacting. Make sure you have your original copies in a secure place so that no one can see those, but that
Yes.
someone has those. If it's the scholarship chairperson specifically who keeps responsibility, but make sure you keep your original copies and make a separate copy to redact so you know who is who, where you have a numbering system for each category and things like that.
Yeah, no, definitely, Lisa. You want to keep your originals, and you definitely, again, on your SOP or your governance documents, you want to make sure that you have it written down somewhere how long you need to keep these records. You definitely want to keep them for a year, because, and I'll show you with the timeline. Once you have your recipients and then you're sending out your funds, you're still going to have to track those funds. I remember I finished my board year as scholarship chairperson in June, and I PCS'd, and in September I was still tracking checks with the previous treasurer because some bursars offices were, not, depositing, or they were still trying to track, some information. Some information might have been missing. I don't know what it was, but I remember, still tracking that till September, with, obviously working with the new board members. But you want to make sure that you have all this in play on your standard of operating procedures. How are the originals going to be handled? Where are they going to be locked? Who is, where are these going to be at in case there is questions from the universities or colleges, later in the year. So if you your scholarship chairperson is gone, you know, you want to make sure that you're able to get this information. So yeah, great point, Lisa. Making sure that you're putting on this SOP, how are you going to handle all your records? And when are you going to shred them? So if you're going to keep them for 2 years, who's responsible for shredding? When are you going to shred them? All that information needs to be on there. So you want to be as detailed as possible with what you're doing with your scholarship program. So again, your procedure area is going to be the longest because it's going to be the most detailed. It's going to tell you how you're going to do things. How are you going to market the scholarship? How are you going to communicate with your stakeholders for the scholarship program? How are you going to handle your records? And you can see here that in this particular SOP, the very last thing is complete the after action report. The last thing on your SOP could be, close out the treasurer's report for all funds, being deposited. Whatever it is, you want to put on there. Again, you might want to add, and this one here doesn't have a reference section, but you might want to have a reference section of, IRS laws, private organization policy that's directed to your local community, anything, again, that can easily help you reference so that if there is something in question, you can easily go to these governance documents. So great points, everyone. I'm going to shift here real quickly because we're running out of time. But this is great. I mean, this is wonderful that, this is wonderful that we can discuss these really great points. And Susanna, I know you've gone in here and given some tips. Do you have anything else that you want to add while I move us into the timeline here? You're on mute, sorry, I think.
Sorry, thanks.
Yeah,
Is
no,
that okay if I take a few minutes?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I was asked to give a few tips, and we've kind of talked about some of these already. Yeah, my first tip is to get organized. So we had 7 in our committee. Me, chair, a co-chair. We had 1 executive board member and then 4 other people from our board. We had 21 applicants, and I sublet those categories into high school seniors who were applying, then college students who had already had some experience, and then spouses. So we had spouses getting their PhDs. They're obviously going to be judged differently than a high school senior. Then we did have 7 judges. We originally talked about doing off-base, but since our community is so small and kind of tight-knit, we voted to have people from base. So we had 2 spouses who were in the spouses club. One was an educator, another one was a stay-at-home mom. We had a chaplain, 2 chief master sergeants from base, a physician from base, and then the wing commander's wife, who was also like in charge of the spouses club, and she is retired lieutenant colonel. So for our binders, I created 8 binders. 7 of them were anonymous. So like we had talked about, everything was blacked out. Then we had 1 confidential binder, which was my binder, which had all the original copy or all the originals. Everything, all the other binders were copies. So I got to know the gentlemen and ladies at like FedEx really well because I made tons of copies there. So the binder, the anonymous binder, I did everything by code names. So I had DH, like dependent, high school, and then coded 1 through 12 or whatever it was. So that was DH01 through whatever. Then I had dependent college, DC01 through what. Then I had SC, so spouse college, and then a number system. The one thing we did come across, and I think it's just per your club to decide, we had a spouse who had only had a high school education. She was foreign. So we put her, and no one knew this, but I put her in the high school category because she didn't have any college experience. So she was grouped with the high schoolers when we judged her information. So, so the binder setup, everything was in codes. So the very beginning of the binder, like the bylaws and everything we talked about that the judges saw, they knew all the rules, what the rubric was going to be, and a checklist of what should have been in the scholarship application. So the first part, we had like a getting to know you, and I'll talk about that in just a second, like their interests, their hobbies, extracurricular, where do you think you're going to be in 5 years, your goals, that sort of thing, and some short answer questions. Then we had the applicants' ACT, SAT, GPA, those type of scores, and then their essay. So there are probably 8 pages per application. Then this goes to my next tip is we did like a pre-score. So, and we did a pre-score for the objective information. So we made a rubric, and I had 2 people from my committee do the pre-scoring. So once again, I scored nothing. I never read anything. I never looked at anything. That way there was no confusion or mix up there. So we made a rubric for if they worked, they got extra points. How well they did on their ACT scores or SATs, that sort of stuff, any extracurricular. So, and then on judging day, all the judges, and if they didn't like how that was scored, we could have an open discussion and talk about it. But on judging day itself, we held it in the base courtroom. So it was quite large. It's a more professional setting. There's space where everyone could spread out because there's so many papers. So we provided snacks, breakfast. So each judge got their binder and then the blank rubrics so that they could score the essays. So each judge saw every essay, and we could do that because there were only 21. If there were more, I really like Tim's suggestion of breaking it up. But each judge saw every essay. So the objective essays were already scored, and they could refer back to that if needed. And then the subjective scoring was their essay. So once they were done with an essay, like their scorecard, they would bring it up to the committee to be recorded. So I had a lady, she was just the scorecard person. So she had, then this is my third tip is scoring. So I had one scorecard for the final scores. The pre-scores were already filled in from what the other ladies from the committee previously done. So she had a score 15 or whatever it was. Then the scorekeeper would pen in the essay score. Everything was like final, no changing it, that sort of thing. Then we added the pre-score to the essay score to get the final score. And then from there, our money was divided up. So we had $12,000. That was our budget. But my side tip would be, fight for your community. So we somehow found an extra like $7,000, $8,000 in our budget. And I advocated very hard to that extra $8,000 to be put towards scholarships, because this is our home. This is our family, our community. So we were able to give $20,000 to our 21 applicants. So from there, the money was divided up into those 3 sections. So the high school students, college students, spouses. So the first place winners from those got $2,000. Second place winners got $1,500. Third place got $1,000. And then after that, because we did offer so much money, everybody else still got $500. So that was very nice. I thought so. And then we did have the spouses, 2 of them tied with same score. So the judges decided to just split that money. So instead of one person getting $1,500, the other one getting $1,000, they both got $750. And that was, once again, a judge's decision. I didn't do anything about it. So at the end, I went through the confidential binder and was able to say, oh, the first place winner was Stacy. She's a high school senior here. She runs track. She was in student government, whatever. And it was fun for them. Like, oh, that's so great. Like, oh, I loved her essay. So then after the things that we came in contact with, that some of the people didn't like, were just to clear up ahead of time, like in the rules and the bylaws, like we talked about, if they've already won the scholarship, because we had repeat applicants. This was like their third or fourth time applying, and they win every time. So do we say good for them because they did the work? And if they're winning $2,000, they did the work. Or you've already won $10,000 from our organization, maybe you shouldn't win anymore. So that's something I've PCS'd, or actually that's not true. I didn't do it again because I was going to do it with Lisa, then she PCS'd, and I wanted to work with Lisa, so I didn't do it. And then another one was the money. It needs to be specified if that money that they win, is that for a specific semester? Because one spouse, she wanted to use it because she won the scholarship like in March. That's when we got all the money out. In our club's eyes, it was supposed to be for the following fall. But a spouse who won $2,000 wanted it for her spring semester because she was about to graduate with her PhD. She wanted it for then. So that got a little bit sticky because one person was like, no, she can only use it for fall. But it's like, so anyway, that was a thing to figure out. My other thing we talked about before, only 5 judges instead of 7 because I made so many copies. And then my last thing was stick with your rules and follow through. So don't change any eligibility after it's already started. This is kind of a sad thing. So my husband, being a JAG, knows background information on people. There was a student who won, I don't know, $1,500, a high school senior. Then it came later on, like a month after she had won, that her dad was in bad standing with the Air Force because of, I don't know, an Article 15, or I don't even know the issue. But some people in the spouses club wanted to take her money away. Yeah. And we didn't think that was fair because it had nothing to do with her. It was her dad. But he's the reason why she's eligible for the scholarship because she is a military dependent.
Right.
So there were things that we, it's hard to make these decisions, but that's what we have, your club for. But I left it. It was hard and it was a lot of work and it was super fun. And I joined Spouses Club not knowing any about this. I just wanted to get to know people and I volunteered and said, sure, scholarship seemed fun. And it was a good learning experience.
Thank you, Susanna, for your lessons learned and your perspective and experience in doing this. And I didn't know that was your first time. So, thank you for sharing that. Because, you did make a great point. It's a hard process because, again, you're the owner of the integrity and the credibility of the organization. So you have a lot of ownership, to ensure that program, can be trusted by the community. And, Susan, you've closed it up for me really well. I can't stress enough that you have somebody taking a look at your governance documents, making sure that you are following everything, to the letter of the law, policies, procedures, so that in the event that, like in Susanna's case, you have somebody questioning, the service member, going through a situation and it can potentially affect the child. Or I think you talked about another one where, you had a tie, how are you going to determine that tie? So that standard of operating procedures is one of the most important documents that you can have, because in that event, reference to it, how do we handle the tie? Oh, we've got it here. How do we handle a situation with a service member? We have it here. So, those people that are always in the what ifs, well, what if this happens? Those are the best people to have on your committee to revise, as an SOP, because they will be thinking about what if this happens? How do we handle it? So I can't tell you enough, minimize your risks, be transparent, and ensure that, you're following all the laws, regulations, and policy out there. Just real quick, because I don't want to take more time. In front of you, you have the scholarship timeline. This will be made available to you as supplemental material. But the scholarship timeline, again, you can just pull it off of your SOP through procedures to give you that checklist of who you need to be contacting when. The marketing, again, like I said, it's your marketing, your communications plan should be on your SOP. So with that, I want to close this out. Does anybody have any other questions or anything that they want to say before we close this webinar up? But I look forward to having you in webinar part 2, where we can further discuss some of the issues Susanna brought up with the process of applications and rubrics.
One more follow-up.
I just added a comment.
Yes.
Oh, sorry,
Lisa.
Tim.
No, go ahead.
I just added a comment in the chat. You know, you had mentioned about the you don't know until you know kind of thing. And, you know, Susanna brought up a great point about some extenuating circumstances, that having a simple line in your SOP or in your governing documents that if an extenuating circumstance, and you can put some examples like have been mentioned, who's going to vote on what happens in those circumstances? Is it going to go to your committee first and then your executive board? Does it go straight to your executive board? Are you going to put it to your judges? You know, having those important pieces so that when circumstances you don't know about until they happen come up, you know how your board as a whole is going to handle it.
Definitely say, yeah, those unknowns, or, you know, a known unknown, you know, go through all those scenarios and go through your after action reports. I mean, those, you can pull out some of those scenarios, because I'm pretty sure in those you will see, oh, the scholarship person ran into this situation and this is how it was handled. You know, it might have been that right process then, but it might not work for, you know, today. But, you know, use all the historical documentation that you have made available to you to pull some of those examples out. Definitely good, great
And
tip, Tim.
My last follow-up to what Susanna said about finding matching funds, or there are usually universities or branch universities in the area that will provide some matching scholarships or scholarship matching of some sort. And we've been really fortunate at past installations where those have been made available to kind of stretch the amount of funds, where if we could only give $500 to whatever, if they were planning to attend the local university, then they would match that with what they had available too.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, great tip. And that will definitely give me some ideas for some spring webinars to talk about matching funds and how to leverage your local resources to make sure that, you know, you can give as much money out there to some of the recipients. And like in Susanna's case, you know, she said, hey, you know, I am the biggest advocate, biggest cheerleader, and I want to give, you know, to as many of our scholarship applicants. So great work, everyone. And thank you for participating. And if you're listening to this, please, you know, feel free to send me a message, connect with me, give me some ideas on how we can help you make sure that, you know, your programs are successful and growing and improving and meeting the needs of your community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna.